Hi, and welcome to episode 23 of the Mouthwash Talk Show. And man, do we have a doozy tonight. Hopefully the internet won't shut down from all the people logging on to see this fine show. I am just honored to have Dana Black and Curtis Hill here tonight to talk about this. And go ahead. We'll start with Dana. Go ahead and introduce yourself. You've been on the show, episode 18, so you're like a repeat offender.
And that would be me, Indiana's own Dana Black, coming to you live from Black Pearl Studios, hanging out with Mouthwash. You know me, I'm the Indiana Democratic Party loudmouth, here to always advocate and fight for regular, everyday people.
Awesome. And Mr. Curtis Hill, we appreciate you stopping in tonight to the Mouthwash Talk Show, a minty fresh take on politics. Tell us about yourself.
Well, John, thanks for having me here. Dana, it's great to see you tonight. As you know, I'm the former Attorney General for the state of Indiana. Defending freedom is my thing. I was also a prosecutor for a number of years, 14 years up in Elkhart County. So I have a long law enforcement background, and that's a passion of mine as well. So I'm looking forward to having a nice, fun discussion, but interesting, and hopefully we can move towards some solutions.
Yes. I'm excited about this. I think we're going to have a good contrast on the topic, which is CRT, critical race theory. And hey, we're going to get right into it. So Lucy Britton on deck.
You know, I actually respect Dana and Curtis both immensely. I think that we're all coming together for the common dream. I mean, my dream for my child is, to have access to the American dream. But not just my child, but all children, and not just in the US, but all over the world. And critical race theory really strips our culture of the idea that we should be, judged by the content of our character and not the color of our skin. And that's the exact opposite of what Dr. King wished for us. So it puts our children in categories of being the oppressor versus being the oppressed. But my child hasn't oppressed anyone. And it makes the oppressed victims who are unable to advocate for themselves, where everything is focused through the divisive lens of race. I remember watching Phil Donahue when Louis Farrakhan was on this show saying that, white people are just afraid that if the situation is reversed, that they're going to be treated as slaves were treated, and that scares them. But I've never owned slaves, and I have oppressed no one. I'm not guilty, but I'm being judged as guilty with no trial and no defense because of the color of my skin. It's quite a lot of putting the shoe on the other foot, as one might say. So for me, division of people, proletariat versus bourgeoisie, the only us versus them that I see is the will of a free people to throw off the yoke of an oppressive government. And how convenient is it for the real oppressors, those who are taking away our freedoms as their profession, those politicians, that we be divided and distracted by CRT when we should be joining together to make sure that the American dream lives for us, our posterity, and all of those around the world who are looking to us for leadership. And so I am personally against CRT, and the research that I've done really points to the roots of this in Marxism. And as a libertarian, of course, I just can't abide that. So what say you,
Dana, in there somewhere?
No, I guess the real question is, well, let's go for this. Curtis, you have seen more than anybody else that I would have known has seen, especially with your bent towards law enforcement and searching for justice. So when you look at critical race theory, how do you see that impacting the ability of someone in your position to make sure that the world is a just place for all?
Well, I agree with your comments as well as Alvin's earlier. I don't see it fitting in at all. Critical race theory is a misnomer in the first place, because we're not talking about an academic theory that we can all embrace at the collegiate level to debate and to inform and to make decisions. We're talking about a compulsion. This is actually informing or advising or instructing children on how they should think, how they should operate, and in a wrongful manner, because it does put the emphasis on sex, it puts the emphasis on race, as opposed to measuring people based upon how they treat you, how you treat them. And that's the foundation that we're shooting for. This has all become sort of a check the box mentality that forces folks to utilize race in a very inappropriate manner, because while we're dealing with critical race theory as a debate, we're getting away from the real essence of what we should be doing, talking accurately and historically about race in America, how race has transpired from the past and the present and the future. That conversation is completely missing because we're wasting our efforts dealing with this education process that's designed to victimize young non-whites and provide a resentment into whites. Lucy, you mentioned it. You've not oppressed anyone, but you certainly feel put upon that you're being accused constantly of having been the oppressor. You're the oppressor. Everything you think about is on the basis of race. Now, I've got news for everybody here. We all have biases. I have a bias. If I see a young black man with a hoodie on and pants hanging down his pants, I'm thinking drug dealer, gangbanger. That's not fair. But that's an assessment that I've made on a prejudgment that I've made. If I see a white guy with tattoos up his neck and on his knuckles, I'm thinking white supremacist. He could be a Sunday school teacher, but I'm using my bias inappropriately, and I'm willing to admit that, and I think we all share that. We need to back up a step, recognize that we're all human, and move in a different direction.
All right, very good. Dana, would you like to chime in on that side of things? And feel free to have a little freedom there if you want to go off on a little bit of a tangent.
Okay. First thing, I'm gonna blow everybody's mind, and I'm gonna say I agree with one thing the former Attorney General Curtis Hill said, and that is we are wasting our efforts talking about critical race theory. And let me tell you why. First of all, critical race theory is not being taught in primary and secondary schools. It is a graduate studies law school theory about how race has played a role in crafting policies and the impact that they have had on communities. Now, so I agree with you on that one. Now, here's the thing that drives me nuts. It's not a curriculum. It's not a training session. It's a theory. And the idea that we are going to close our minds to learning about one set of theories versus another set of theories. We have all studied socialism in our country. We have all studied communism in our country. And like critical race theory, a lot of Americans can't tell the difference because they haven't actually done the homework. So it's not that you have to agree with what the theory or the philosophy is to actually learn and understand it. Is that you are opening your mind up to a new concept. Now, if we are saying that there is something untrue about critical race theory, I'd like to know what it is. Because from the founding of our nation, everything has been centered on race. Policies have been crafted from the very beginning on race. We had, anytime you look at, the Native American movement of moving them from their homes to a plant, to a reservation, there was a policy in place for that. There was race involved in making that decision. The decision on race was the Native people who were, the Native people of this land who were not white were deemed expendable and they could be moved away. That was a policy that was written. The Fugitive Slave Act is a policy that was written based on the enslavement of Africans, and that it was time for them to go back to their master after they got free. That was a policy that was written, that was implemented based on race. Heck, we ain't got to go with these obscure policies and acts. We'll just go to one that actually has racism in the name. The Chinese Exclusion Act was a policy written by the United States to literally exclude a whole group of people because they didn't want them in this nation. Now, it's a theory of how we got here based on systems. There are a lot of other systems that have been put in place that have racist undertones. Poll taxes. When we wanted to go vote during Jim Crow, there were states that put in poll taxes, and it was a policy that made it more difficult for Black people in the South to vote because they didn't have the same kind of money. Or the tests, they had to take, the jelly bean test. or the grandfather clause, where if your grandfather didn't vote, then you can't vote. These are all policies, and they may seem ambiguous on the surface because they didn't say these are anti-black bills. But if you were enslaved a generation before, of course your grandfather is not voting in an election, and therefore they can't vote in an election. But it was geared and designed to disenfranchise Black people. We are not saying that the individual is responsible, as Lucy alluded to. It's not Lucy, it's the systems that are in place. And there are people who benefit from the systems that are put in place, and there are people who do not benefit from those systems that are put in place. Have we made progress? Absolutely. Are we getting there? Yes, we are. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you. One of the things that they talk about, people want to bring up is the incrementalism. Well, first of all, why do I have to be incremental in my rights? Why can't I have every last one of them right now like you got? Why I gotta wait? Why I gotta step into it? You got yours. Why can't I get mine? But you want me to be patient until you are ready. And I don't mean you, Lucy. I don't mean you, Curtis. I mean the system wants me to be patient until they are comfortable with giving me every piece of my rights. And that is what critical race theory is. First of all, it's not even being taught in secondary and primary schools. Now, if we are talking about the fact that we are wanting to teach history the way it's supposed to be taught and people are offended by that, that's another issue, because what people want to do is take all of history and those things that pertain to Black people, brown people, indigenous people, and say it is critical race theory when that is not the truth. That is not the truth. Okay, it is. So people don't want to know about the Tulsa race riots. Oh, it makes me uncomfortable. It makes me sad. It makes me feel bad about myself. It happened. The Holocaust makes me sad, but at least I want to know about it. So if I know about it, then I can prevent it from happening again.
But the Holocaust was perpetrated by white people of German, they were German, and I've got German in my wood pile. So does that make me responsible for the Nazis?
It's not.
No, of course not.
Critical race theory is not saying that you are responsible. It's about the systems that are put in place. It's not Lucy is the
no,
one.
But you're wanting me to accept responsibility, to pay for it, to feel guilty for something that happened in the past that I had nothing to do with.
It's a theory. It wants you to understand how those concepts are applied into policy making. It's a theory.
I'm actively fighting all of the policies that would create division in race. And in fact, the biggest anti-Black bill that we have in this country in recent memory is the Patriot Act. And that was penned by President Biden, who said, if you don't vote for me, you ain't Black. And so
you know what, Lucy, I'm gonna stop you there. Don't, I do appreciate.
Yeah, this is hold on a second. Hold on a second, Dana. Hold on a second. I want to.
When white folks always want to tell Black folks what the most anti-Black thing is. You don't know what's anti-Black to us. You know what you think will be anti-Black to us, but you don't know what's anti-Black to us.
Putting Black men in jail. I advocate releasing everyone from prison right now who is a nonviolent offender. We know that marijuana laws are specifically targeted at Black people. They're still being used today. My son, who is Native American and white, can go, drive through, get pulled over with marijuana, and he'll be treated very differently than somebody who has darker skin than him. Because he'll be perceived as white. That is not fair.
Last time, but that's not what critical race theory is. And the idea that we're saying, well, I don't believe in socialism, so I don't want it to be taught in school. It's not an indoctrination. It's an understanding of a philosophy. Well, I don't believe in Marxism, so I shouldn't have it taught in school.
I teach my children socialism and Marxism both so that they can be avoided and they can actively fight the evil ideologues. If you
disagree with critical race theory, then you should at least teach it to people so they can make their own objective decision about whether or not it's a philosophy they want to follow or they don't. But to suggest that you don't teach is like burning books.
I see it as the nose under the tent. I think what's being publicly said about critical race theory is very different than the research that I've done in the Frankfurt.
It's been around before.
Okay, let's let Curtis get in here. I think I see his wheels turning here. And then Lucy, we got other people that are going to ask questions. So you went from no question to 5 questions. So let's cool your jet.
I think you raised an excellent point, and I tracked with you through the history of Blacks in America, which is a very important story that needs to be told, needs to be understood. I think the crux of the issue here with critical race theory is that there is so much information and perhaps misinformation out there about what it is, what it's not, and we have to be very, very clear on what we're talking about. For some, it may be theory. Others are promoting it as what Alvin was talking about, as something of oppressors and victims. And And even though it is something that's designed for post-secondary education, there are schools around the country, private, public, and the whatnot, that are trying to introduce this topic, this subject matter, as a mainstream part of their educational process. What we have to do is break it down into what it really is, and then determine, is it a theory that allows for excellence, or excuse me, academic exercise to allow people to understand issues and decide for themselves, or is it being promoted as some type of indoctrination or some type of push on how someone should think? And there's a key difference. One is something that we want to promote, academic experience, enlightenment, understanding issues. The other is perhaps more problematic. And I think that's where we need to be in the conversation when we're trying to figure out what it is we're talking about when we're talking about critical race theory.
But that's not what's happening, right? What we have right now is a bunch of people saying that you have this literally, right, conservative leaning think tanks that are going around to specifically suburban America, not urban, but suburban America, and saying, oh my God, they're teaching your children to hate themselves. And that is so not true. That is, you talk
but we
about.
We don't know that. It may not be
we
true.
do know that. We do know that.
No.
We do know that the teachers are not teaching critical race theory. They may be teaching social studies that deals with a lot of racist history in America, which we want to pretend like it didn't happen when it really did.
I think that's the question. We have to find out what it is that they're planning to teach, what it is that they are going to teach, as opposed to speculating one way or the other.
What is this? So after 40 years of this thing being out here, this critical race theory is not a new concept. It's been around for 40 years. Why is it that it is in 2021 that everybody is all up in arms about a 40-year-old theory? Because
it gives a name to this process that is developed with this diversity, inclusion, and equality thing.
So there's something. Yeah. So he said there's something wrong. DEI was poison. Do y'all believe the diversity, inclusion, and equity is poison?
Here's what I believe
that equity is.
Here's what I believe about that. I believe that inclusion is not a bad thing, but competence is better. I believe that diversity is not a bad thing, but excellence is better.
Okay.
I believe that equality is not a bad thing, but I believe that freedom is better. So if you're going to give me an example where you're going to have, I'm going to have 5 kids that I have to prepare. Do I want to prepare those kids for being excellent, or do I want to prepare those kids for being, I need 2 blacks, 1 Asian, and 1 white? And if we're developing that process, we're pushing towards mediocrity. We want to have diversity. We want to be inclusive. We want to be to push equality, but not at the expense of freedom, competence, and excellence as we grow our culture.
So all right, Dana, I'm going to have to stop you there. I just want to do one quick thing, and then we're going to get another guest on. You're going to have more chances to get in this. I love it. This is what this show is designed for. Tell your opinion. We appreciate your opinion. We respect your opinion, and you don't feel bad about saying it. So what I want to do right now is just sort of take a moment here. My friend Tim Couch, he passed away last week, and he had just gotten a new kidney about a month or so ago. And he was a guy that I met when I was running for office, and we sort of clicked together. But he was a black man that was raised in Fountain Square. We're about the same age, and we were talking. He always kids me about being his rich white friend, and he calls me when I'm going to work and to tell me that he's retired and he's got a pension and all that. But this rich white guy's got to go to work. So I missed those conversations already and just a week out. But one of the stories he told me was he'd go over to his white friend's house and they'd give him a drink of water and they would throw the glass in the trash. And you know what? And I grew up on the South Side, and I remember there was families that my parents were not like that. And I think this is a generational curse that gets passed down. There is still some people that just think that that's the way it is. And that, to me, is what critical race theory is about what, how people think about other people and how it used to be. We've come a long way, but you know what? Really, in the last 40 years, we have not. It's just the conversation's changed. And I think if we were just to more embrace each other's cultures and get to know each other and learn about each other, I think that would be good. So that's my little rant. Usually I don't get to say much on the show, but I wanted to do that for Tim. I dearly miss him. He just had complications, I think, from that kidney transplant, and he would love this show. So I'm going to bring on the next guest. It's going to be Ed. So bye, Lucy. You'll be back. Ed's coming on now. So let's see if I can do this without having a major blow up. Oh, look at that. I'm a heck of a engineer, aren't I? Wow. Ed, welcome.
Thank you.
And
go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll just say, get it.
What's up, Ed?
How you doing, Dana? Hey, first of all, I would like to reach out to Mr. Liu. I watched the video as someone who also moved from Southern California. I would openly welcome that debate because I don't agree with a lot of what he had to say. But since he's not here, I'll go ahead and skip over that. My question to both our guests, there's so much to dig into here, but one of the core principles to me as a veteran, especially as a Hispanic veteran, and knowing the history of it. You got 6 months out to sea, you have a lot of time to read. I know we have sections of Arlington Cemetery that are dedicated just to freed slaves, because once slavery was over, here comes Reconstruction, and you're still not one of us. Policies such as post-World War II, we have the GI Bill. The GI Bill did a lot to, when Curtis Hill's talking about, excellence, GI Bill put a lot of GIs in college. Half of the GIs, like within 3 years of the end of World War II, were, returning veterans. But a lot of those schools were cut off from, they didn't allow blacks in those schools. One of the things I have a really hard time with is veterans have fought. We have been there. Hispanics, Asians, African Americans, we've been there. My grandfather fought in Korea. I'm a Navy veteran, and I tip my hat to General Miley for testifying before Congress that the military especially needs to stay committed to critical race theory so that we can understand the mistakes that we've made and the policies we made. And so to both my guests, for both of your parties, like I have a hard time when, politicians get up and rant and rave about Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, but at the same time, as a veteran, you're trying to shut down conversation that we're having on what we've done to our veterans over the years. And there's a lot of policy there. This isn't just the general people. Veterans have been really screwed by some of these policies. And so I'd like to open it up to both of you to kind of discuss from that angle.
So from the veteran angle, or from
from me, I would say there's the same people who want to say that Colin Kaepernick is, Colin Kaepernick took his knee, took the knee from an actual veteran. He met with him, talked to him. Nate Boyer is the one that said, hey, I understand where you're coming from. Take it, this is how I would suggest you go about it. That gets completely ignored. And so I have a issue with, I guess I would say with the Republicans kind of taking this up as, hey, we're pro-veteran, but at the same time, I see states wanting to shut down CRT, and veterans are a big part of that policy. Minority veterans have been excluded. And so, I was just wondering if you could address that.
Well, let me see if I can make a question out of this. So what he's basically saying is that how are minorities in the veteran situation accounted for? Or, what are we looking for? Is that sort of close, Ed? As far as
that is, because this isn't just limited to little policies here or there. Like, these are people we say we care for, and that they make up America, and that, well, we've been there fighting. How much more fighting do we have to do to get an equal slice of the pie?
Yeah, I feel you, Ed, because as history has shown, once those military veterans in uniform, those black men came back after World War II, they were the ones that were being lynched because there was the fear that, oh, here come these strong black men who've been over to other places and liberated other places, they too were being lynched. But we love our veterans, right? We love our veterans, but we'll lynch those. So here's the deal. Okay, so I get what you're saying. CRT says, what are the systems that we're putting in place, and how does race play a role in those policies? So when you have a policy that says, you know, every GI who serves in the military can get some assistance to go to school, there was a carve out. We know that there was a carve out because unfortunately, people of color didn't always get the opportunity to participate, right? At one point, our military was segregated. So all of these, what critical race theory does is say, okay, how did we get to where we are? What was the philosophy behind the crafting of this particular bill or this particular policy and the impact that it's going to have on a community? So it's not, again, people need to understand what it is, first of all, and understand it's a theory and it's a philosophy that people can study, just like you study Nietzsche, you study all the other European philosophers, and we don't necessarily get down with everything they're talking about. Oh, by the way, how come it is in our curriculum we only talk about, for the most part, European philosophers? There were philosophers in every part of the world, but we don't learn about them. We don't learn about the philosophers of the African nations or the Asian nations as much. India does get a little, you know, but what I'm saying is we even in that education point, because the theory is that everything that we do is based on a certain lens. And if we pretend like that lens doesn't exist, then we can't actually get to the root to solve real problems.
Dana, let me ask you this question. Should everything we do be seen through a racial lens?
I don't think everything we do should be seen through a racial lens, but everything we do is seen through a racial lens.
Well, and I think that may be the crux of the issue, because if we look back historically, I cannot disagree with you that much of what has molded our nation has been in policies of race, sexism. I mean,
homophobia.
You went through the history, and as we've moved forward, particularly after we got past 1964, 1965, and some of the landmark legal cases, everything that theoretically we've been trying to do is move beyond that. So we absolutely have to learn from our history, but the question becomes, what do we want to do going forward? If critical race theory starts off with understanding our race history and then moves towards locking us into that past, that's one thing. If critical race history talks about and engages in the legitimate history of our country, warts and all, and then moves to a point of, now look, folks, we've had an entire history where race has been the emphasis, has been the harbinger, has been the springboard, but we're going through the looking glass. We're moving forward. We're going beyond. We have to understand where we've been, but we want to go someplace different. I think that's a critical juncture in terms of where we're at. You know, Ed, to get to your point about the military, my father was from that generation and came back and served his country and came back and fought all sorts of racism and hardships. He was the NAACP president in our local community for 12 years. He experienced our home was bombed because of his civil rights activity. But one thing that my father did in all of his activism, he was always, first and foremost, a free American, and he fought for his country. His country sometimes turned its back on him. He never turned his back on his country or his flag, and always was moving towards that goal of moving beyond race. And so from my perspective, I never want to see us forget about our history, but I certainly don't want to see us locked into our history to where we can't grow and evolve into what my father's dream was and what the nation's documents that haven't always supported us, but have always been in existence for the concept of a better system.
So I got to jump in real quick. I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
First of all, there's nothing about who we are as America have we ever been locked into anything. Even though we institutionalized the enslavement of Africans, that was not locked in. It's gone now. The enslavement of Africans in America is gone. We've never been locked into a specific thing. We continue to evolve. Women were not able to vote after 75, 80 years of working hard to convince that, tax-paying citizens should be able to vote. Women were given the right to vote. There was a point where we didn't. We're never locked into anything. And that's why the crafters, even though they were imperfect in every way possible, they created a living document. And as soon as it was written, it was amended. We have never been locked into anything. So I think that the idea or the notion that we could be locked into anything is not who we are. The nation has forever been evolving. Now, I understand how I thank you for your grandfather and the lessons that he taught you, but that was your grandfather and that's what he experienced. That doesn't mean that there are a whole lot of other people that may have experienced the same thing. And we have to look at not the individual, because the individual was able to survive and thrive despite the obstacles that were put in his way, not because the obstacles weren't there. And I think as long as we pretend like we don't want to talk about the things that were there, we'll never understand how to move them. How can you figure out how to solve a problem if you're not willing to look at the root of the problem?
I don't think there's anybody that's talking about not looking at the root. At least I'm not talking about not looking at the history behind race in America. I think it's imperative.
Yes, I'm not saying we're not locked, but we're not locked in. We're not. There's nothing that we're locked into.
Well, we don't want to be locked in. I understand what you're saying, and I agree we shouldn't be locked in. But even during periods of slavery, there were periods of time where we were hampered by slavery. We were hampered by Jim Crow. But as you've correctly pointed out, our founding documents gave us the opportunity to move beyond that. Even though we were a country that was engaged in slavery, the basis for freeing us from the bounds of slavery were right there all the time. And we've used that document to move forward through our history.
Absolutely. But that's why I'm saying you said you don't want to see us. Yes, let's learn and study and get to where we need to be, but you don't want to be locked in. I reject the notion that we would ever be locked in, because we've never been locked into anything. We've never been locked in.
We've made tremendous progress with regard to systemic racism since 1964.
We have, because we've not been locked in.
By dismantling this government-sponsored racism. We've gone to a point where 10 years ago, we didn't have the racial strife that we have now between the races. Now, that doesn't mean that we didn't have racism. That doesn't mean that we didn't have people who experienced bad situations with racism, sexism, and whatnot.
I would disagree with that too, because you have Georgia legislators right now, Texas legislators right now, who are crafting policies to make it difficult for people of color to vote.
I don't agree with that. Tell me how that is.
They're masking them in a whole bunch of other things. They're saying they're calling it this, they're calling it that. But when you have a policy that even the Supreme Court in their decision said, if it just so happens to inconvenience one group over another, so what? The Supreme Court said that just a couple weeks ago. So we know that these policies are being created they're racist policies to make it more difficult for people of a certain group to be involved in the policies.
Let's talk about that. Tell me how it is that the voting laws in Georgia are oppressive to a particular group.
One of the first policies is that they're trying to get rid of souls to the polls on Sunday by changing the hours on Sundays and things like that, because they know typically Black churches get together, they organize, and they take their congregates to the polls, and they do it as a thing. But what I'm saying to you is, and that's what critical race theory talks about, it can seem innocuous on the surface because it doesn't specifically say this is targeting Black people, but there's a way to write things and craft things in a way that target people. That's just like the show me your papers law in Arizona. The show me, because you might look like you came from across the border, we can stop you and pull you over. Stop and frisk. It doesn't say we're going to stop and frisk Black people, but that's what it was, because we all fit the description. So to suggest that people have to explicitly say that we're targeting Black people, or we're targeting white people, or we're targeting Hispanic people is, in my opinion, naive.
I don't think you have to say that you're specifically targeting Black people for it to be problematic. But when we're talking about in the voting integrity issues across the states, when we're talking about an ID, my understanding is that voter ID is determined to be discriminatory by some because black people are more likely to not have IDs than white people. I've seen no empirical data that supports that. In fact, I don't know a single black person that doesn't have a photo ID, and I don't see how it's improper for someone who comes to the polls. If I come to the polls and my name's Curtis Hill and I have an opportunity to vote, I think it's entirely permissible for someone to establish that I am in fact Curtis Hill and I'm in the right location, so that I don't vote twice. And unfortunately, we have people in this country who do take advantage on both sides of the voting rules, and want to push an agenda rather than just vote their own vote.
So these voting laws, in my opinion, like the CRT laws that are being passed right now, they're crafting laws in search of a problem. We already know that there was no voting fraud, no widespread voter violations, none of this. None of this was happening, and it hasn't happened. There has not been widespread voter fraud. Hold on. There has not been widespread voter fraud. It has been debunked. In fact, in Michigan, just yesterday, they were having a hearing against two attorneys because they had said we have all this voter fraud, and they didn't produce any evidence. So they're going through a sanctions hearing. So they created these laws because they want to clean up voter fraud that doesn't exist. The same thing with these CRT laws. They're creating these CRT laws and say we're not going to teach CRT when it doesn't exist.
Okay, Curtis, I'm going to have to break in here because this is actually a good segue to do the Mark Small piece, and then we'll bring Tiffany on because I'm supposed to be running this show, and I'm sitting here listening to you folks and going, man, this is really good. So, and I want to help you answer Ed's question. So let's just put whatever makes you stronger, whatever almost kills you makes you stronger, and then in the military. And then that'll do that whole segment that you just did. That'll make it answering Ed's question.
I hope I got you.
So we're going to go ahead and play this next piece for Mark Small. So you really did a good segue there into sort of our history lesson of the Constitution and some landmark dates here. So let's go ahead and play that if I can find it. Let's see, where is it? We're gonna have to wait. I don't see it.
Happens to me all the time on my show. I get my buttons all mixed up.
I don't even think I've loaded this one yet. So this is gonna be awesome to do this. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring Tiffany on, and we'll have her ask her question. And thanks, Ed. I tried to help with your question getting answered, but I think we got into a rabbit hole that was very interesting and entertaining and informational. So, Ed, thank you, and we'll see you again on Conspiracy Theory. All right, Tiffany, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I enjoy this conversation. It's nice to hear both sides, and I pretty much agree with everything that Curtis says. So one of the things, Dana, I agree with one thing that you said. I'm gonna get to that in a second. So I want to plug my Fishers GOP. We have a meeting on Thursday here in Fishers, and we are doing a conversation about critical race theory and what we're finding in the suburbs, in Fishers, in our Hamilton Southeastern schools, is that critical race theory is being taught to students. And I agree with what you said, Dana. Critical race theory is higher level graduate concepts. But the problem is that it's being taught to elementary students, and it's being taught to kids who don't have the aptitude to understand what they're being told. And you hear stories like white children are being told that they're oppressors, and they don't even understand what that means. So they're taking these concepts and ideas and pushing it on children who don't understand them. So I agree that critical race theory is a high level, graduate level coursework, and it's a theory. But the problem with the theory is that it's being taught to the wrong audience. Not only is our young children being told that they're oppressors, I had to ask some of my colleagues in Fishers One. So we're a grassroots organization trying to ensure that that academic excellence is at the forefront of Hamilton Southeastern schools. I had to ask, I said, well, if white children are being told that they're oppressors, what are we telling brown children? Because I can't imagine, how this is going over in a classroom. And children of color are being told that they are victims. that they're never going to achieve anything in life because the systems are going to keep them down, that they'll never amount to much in life because their education system is against them, the judicial system's against them. And oh, by the way, why would you ever get out of bed? Because you're never going to be successful. So I am against critical race theory being taught in schools. I don't think it has a place. The reason why so many people move to Fishers, move to the suburbs, is because of the great schools and the academic excellence. When I moved here 14 years ago, Hamilton Southeastern schools were number 7 in the state of Indiana. We've fallen to number 17. That's a problem. That's a problem. That means that that classic education that should be taught in our schools is not the priority. So that's what we're dealing with in these suburban areas. And that's the issue. I certainly agree that it's a concept. It is high reaching. It just does not have a place in our school system. What people will say is that, oh, we're not teaching critical race theory. But what we're finding is that the environment around the children is not a normal school system. They've got counselors that come in. It's just the books that children are reading, the concepts that they're being exposed to, the way that they're doing their assignments, the way that they're being graded. It is not a traditional education that you, me, Curtis, or John grew up with. We're simply not focusing on reading, writing, and arithmetic. We are more designed with more focused on dismantling these systems around these students. And that's the problem, is it just does not have a place in our schools. And one of the persons who's making comments is Jennifer McWilliams. She's actually speaking at our meeting on Thursday. And I encourage anybody who doesn't fully understand what's going on in our schools to go to any forum where Purple for Parents or Jennifer McWilliams is presenting, because we all need to get a foundational understanding of critical race theory, because what it's doing is it's pushing down our children. It's telling them that they're oppressed, and then it's also telling our children that they're victims. And my dream, kind of how Lucy had her dream and her vision, my dream is that every child sees their unlimited potential in the United States of America. I've been very lucky to spend some time with Victoria Spartz. She's our congresswoman from the 5th District, and she comes from the Ukraine. And here in America, when she talks about America, everything is possible. Everything is possible because she came from some place where there was an opportunity. And I think that's the message that our children need to know. If they're Black, brown, Native American, Asian, every child needs to know that they have unlimited potential in the United States. If somebody can't make it in the United States, they're not going to make it anywhere. So, based on our understanding of critical race theory, my question is, what impact do we see it having on our culture, society, and schools in the next 20 years?
I thought for a second there you went to the Lucy Brenton School of No Question, but you did come out with a question. So Dana, go ahead.
I was going to let Curtis go first since I went first the last time.
Well, I think what we're facing right now with these conversations on critical race theory, with these conversations about inclusion and whatnot, is a fear in our nation. A fear to talk openly and honestly about what's on one's mind when it comes to race. And that's a very dangerous position for us to be in, because much of what's going on is a corporate cover-up. When you see companies, large corporations taking positions of, well, we're going to have an inclusion officer, well, that sounds good. But if you're doing it because you're just checking the box, which I would submit is exactly what's happening with much of corporate America, you're not really getting the job done. If you're gonna put a Black person in a position, call them an inclusion officer, and then walk away from the issue, you've done nothing. And that's what's being done out of fear. And if we don't pull that together, we're not going to be anywhere further down the road in 20 years. And we have to be able to talk openly about these issues. We have to be able to ask questions. If you're white and you don't understand, you should be able to ask a question about race and not be vilified or accused because you simply asked a question. There's so much that we don't know. when I have audiences that I talk to, and they say, and these are typically white conservative audiences, and they'll say, well, Curtis, I don't have a racist bone in my body. And I believe them. I believe they believe that. But one of the things that I get back to is, look, we need to be empathetic. We need to understand that we all have biases. And so one of the things that we have to do is be honest enough to acknowledge that we all have biases. And if we can have that conversation, many people who don't think they have a racist bone in their body, and they probably are not racist, but they do engage in bias. And that's a human condition. We all fall short. We all do that. And once we understand that, we can be empathetic. So I think the real danger in these conversations about critical race theory, about inclusion, diversion, equity, about all of the issues that have come to light in the last 6-7 years is it's squeezing the ability to speak freely and openly about how we feel about racial issues in America. And if we have to do something, we have to be able to move beyond this brick in the road and talk openly and share, and also be forgiving of each other and ourselves in terms of moving forward in a direction that doesn't emphasize race, understands race's implication on our daily lives, that may still continue on our daily lives, but without this accusatory or approach that suggests that someone needs to pay a price. And that position is dependent on different perspectives. Some people may not have that perspective, but that's what my fear is of what we'll face in the next 10 to 20 years.
Oof, okay, I can go.
You can go.
Yeah, you look like you're ready to go.
I'll make this quick. First of
What
all,
happens when you let me go first?
yeah. I mean, come on. I can be a gentlewoman. You know what I'm
Hey,
saying?
we got you surrounded by Republicans, so watch out.
What the audience didn't hear was that, wow, this is the first time I've been around this many Black Republicans at one time. But anyway, a couple things. Tiffany, have you actually seen a teacher's plan, her study plan for this year, and seeing where that teacher is teaching critical race theory? Have you seen that lesson plan? Has anyone seen a lesson plan? I haven't seen one.
So do you have children in the school system?
I don't have any kids, girl.
So this is what is so interesting. My daughter graduated high school in 2019, and I am part of Fishers One, grassroots organization, just really wanting to keep academic excellence in our schools and watching our community. And so we have a large parent group. And I would invite you to come to one of our meetings so that you can hear what these parents are telling us about the assignment.
Asking, have you seen the lesson plan? I want to see
I've not seen a lesson plan. Okay. I have not spent time with students because I don't have a child in the school system.
Okay, and that's what I worry about, because people are saying that these things are being done, but I haven't actually seen a lesson plan that outlines that that's what's being done. It's an assumption, just like voter fraud. Couldn't find it, but we're gonna keep talking about it, that it's being taught. But I have not seen a lesson plan. The president of the teachers union came out just the other day and said it is not being taught. But I digress from there. Curtis, you said that people are living in fear, and that they create these diversity, equity, and inclusion officers because they live in fear. Governor Holcomb just created a DEI officer last year. It's a sister that's got that job. And the Republican Party actually had its inaugural DEI class announced last week. So are you saying that the Republican governor and the entire Indiana Republican Party created these DEI officers and inaugural class because they are living out of fear?
I believe that the governor's appointment of a position of that nature is one to check the box. Yes.
Oh, wow. So are you saying Republicans?
I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's necessary to look at state government and determine that you would like state government to look a different way. And if you are effectively in leadership, you can do that yourself. If you've got a cabinet, you can go around the table to your own cabinet and you can say, what are you doing to be more inclusive? We don't need to have a person, a cabinet level position, to then go around in various agencies and say, do you have enough Black people? Do you have enough women? Do you have enough Asians? So
I be daggone, me and Curtis agree on something, because as soon as I saw the appointment, I put a Facebook post up saying after all these years, he's just now realizing he doesn't have enough diversity in his government. I said that then he should be able to look at his cabinet, look at his government officials, all of his leaders, and determine, okay, are we making sure the entirety of our society is being represented in this government?
And it shouldn't be based on what they look like.
But see, it's not y'all killing me with this. What it looked like. Here we are, 3 Black people with we look alike, but we have very different and diverse ways of thinking. Yeah. And it's not necessarily about the look; it's about the lived experiences. If you don't happen to have my lived experience, that's just like. But if you're not being,
but Dana, if you're not being selected because of your lived experiences, and you're being selected because of how you look, that's the problem. But I agree with you completely.
Necessary. It's necessary because more than likely the person who does not look like you has had a different lived experience. Not saying that we've all had the same lived experiences, but we are going to have for example, Curtis Hill. My best friends just had their baby and they're beautiful. I mean, my little niece is gorgeous. This is their second child. They are a lesbian couple. Their lived experience is very different, but they had to literally fight the state of Indiana to get their child, both parents' name on the birth and death certificates. That's their lived experience. Most people don't have to have that lived experience. So what I'm saying to you is you got to have people who are going to have a different train of thought, a different way of seeing the world in these positions to make decisions. I find it interesting that we're bypassing the point that I just made about the Republican Party just announcing its inaugural DEI class, which Tiffany is a part of, and I congratulated her, but I also send y'all a warning, be careful, because when they send out bad policies that harm our communities, they either gonna say, oh, well, they was down with it, what's wrong with it, or, just be careful. So I'm saying, just be careful. But what I'm saying is, so is it the Republican Party now realizes that they are under the gun and they gotta recruit some Black people? Because see, Curtis, bruh, you got more votes than Trump in 2016 in the state of Indiana. You the Black man who ran and won as a attorney general, Black man in Indiana, got more votes than Trump. But what did they do 4 years later? They primaried you up out of there, brother. So you can't tell me that the Republican Party is all about diversity and inclusion. And when they had a true winner, a true winner on their team, they said bye-bye to you. I don't even know why they did you like that. You got more votes than Trump in 2016. So I worry about why y'all saying we got to have these people are putting these diversity and inclusion things in place because they're scared. If they were scared, Curtis, they would have kept you. Now,
you heard me. I didn't say we need those.
I know. I got it. I got what you're saying. Now, the other thing you said was, this is over the last 6 or 7 years that we're having this conversation. We've been having this conversation for over 400 years. It's just now that white folk and people who have not been nearly as oppressed as we are starting to listen. We've been having this diversity and inclusion conversation since we got here.
Not this particular conversation. I would agree with you that this is a 400-year process that we have to sort through. But there's ebbs and flows. Just like for a portion of that 400 years, we were enslaved. For a portion of that 400 years, we had Jim Crow. So there's different breakdowns of what's happened in that 400 years. What I'm talking about, and it's probably more like the last 8 or 10 years, the intensity of the issues that are on us right now, that have come up in the last 8-10 years. That's a new intensity.
Do you know why though? Do you know why? Do you understand why it's happening? I do. I really, really do, because technology changes everything. Before, you had to literally take your behind to a library, open up an encyclopedia and sit down and read it. Now I got the Encyclopedia Britannica a click away, and I can read and I can learn, and then I can share it on all these social medias. And so now you can share misinformation too, because we saw how that works out too. So if we are no longer in agrarian age, we are past the industrial age, we are in the information age. We are at a point in our time where information can get disseminated very, very quickly. Before, you had to, like I said, you had to go to a library or a bookstore and then get the hard copy. I can now download a book and read it while I'm driving to work. So the reason why these things are elevating themselves is because technology has changed in a way for us to get the information. As long as they was hiding it from us. I have some of my classmates who came out in 1988 at North Central High School say they never heard of the Tulsa race riot. Why? Because it wasn't taught in our schools. But the internet and the information age made all that data and all those photographs and all those things available to us to have real conversations about.
There's a statement that we have to question. Is that a statement that helps, or is that a statement that harms?
It's a statement that enlightens. It doesn't help or harm. It gives you information for you to go, oh, well, wait a minute. Well, why are they putting that pipeline right there? Why do we have to have it right there? I mean, think about how Curtis, think about how I-65 came through Indianapolis. Think about that. Think about how I-65 came through Indianapolis. It didn't go through Geist. It didn't go through Castleton. It didn't go through Nora. It went through traditionally Black neighborhoods and carved them up. That is a policy that was written and a decision that was made. These neighborhoods are expendable. These neighborhoods are not. And they base those decisions on the race of the people, the economics of the people, and the economics of the people was usually dependent on the race of the people. So the idea that we don't want to literally dig down deep into why these things are being done means that we want to stay in darkness. We want to stay there. We cannot stay, but technology says, nah, I can Google what I want to know, and you can't keep hiding the truth from me.
Well, I remember the Ralph Coddington Greenleaf Farm. If you go down at Keystone, he was my dad's boss, Holcomb Chemicals. They split his farm right in half, and he was a sort of a rich white guy. So I don't know. I'm not going to
rule Indiana. You notice I said specifically Indianapolis. Notice
Keystone and Forest and 65 is Indianapolis. So
you're talking about south side or north side? South side or north side?
Now at south side, and now it is actually Hotel Tango whiskey, or vodka. So that's Ralph Coddington. The dude was like really cool dude. He had Clydesdale.
I'm not saying that white people didn't lose out in the way that the highway came through. What I said was entire neighborhoods.
And that's I know that came up in the topic of the new 65-70 split as one of the topics. So that's a good example of how things have changed, because they did have a seat at the table on where this was going to go, how it was going to affect them, and I know that people got in there. Absolutely. So Curtis, I'm going to let you have the last word on this part. I'm going to play Mark Small's thing, and we keep losing Tiffany on here, and then we're going to play Mark Small's little piece here about the history of in our nation, and then I'm going to give you a last word on that, and then I'm going to do peeps on the streets, and then we're going to do the conspiracy theory. I knew this was going to be longer than an hour, but I have really loved this conversation.
You know, I love when we get a chance to share ideas and bounce off each other, because you know what? I'm actually surprised. Curtis Hill and I actually agree on a few things. And I think we have the same end goal in mind. Yeah. I think our paths are somewhat different in how we get there.
Yeah, I would agree.
I'm impressed.
And that's what we're after. That's what we're after in this world. We're after. We have a common. We love our nation. We love our people. We want to find solutions. We have different ways of getting there. And if we sit down, talk, share information, listen, we can make it happen.
Yeah, but we got to know the root cause of the problem.
Yeah.
Like, when you go to AA meeting, you have to admit that you're an alcoholic before you can actually solve your alcoholism. If we do not look at the root of the problem that exists in our nation, we will never be able to solve them. And pretending like it didn't happen because your feelings get hurt,
I agree,
it's not going to get us there.
Yes, and so let's go ahead and play this. And this is the kind of talk. And I get that same thing you said, that we agree on much more than we disagree on, as long as we're willing to sit down and break bread and listen to each other and try to look through each other's lens. As Dana says, it's how you were brought up, what's your culture. We all have different stories, and I love to hear people's stories. That's one thing I've really enjoyed about doing this show and the Do Something Any show, is I get to hear people's journeys. And it's just so interesting to see the hard times and the good times. and the people that are successful don't let those hard times get them down. And I think we are definitely at a point in our history of the state, the country, of possibly the world, of having some good dialogue without yelling at each other and respecting each other. What's that?
I'm loud.
Yelling and loud are two different things.
Yeah,
So
I said that at the beginning,
that's
right?
a whole nother show.